Hi again, this is Irmina, and thank you so much for visiting with me and journeying through this movement practice. The whole purpose of the practice is, or recording the practice, is to document and answer one simple question. What actually happens inside of us as we try to start, maintain, continue an important practice in our lives? I think often we don't associate negative things as a practice. For example, drinking heavily, um, scrolling, doom scrolling, um, watching things that we know make us feel bad, or etc. But anything that we do repetitively or consistently is a practice. Some of it is conscious, like this movement practice I'm doing with you, and some of it is subconscious, like the habit of repeatedly rethinking something rather than moving forward. These are all practices, and there's something that is being fed within us and something that is being nurtured within us, whether it's a positive habit that moves us toward a goal or a negating or negative habit that takes us away from our life path or missions and our goals. So, in this video, I'm going to explore some questions that I find myself asking throughout this process. It's been 24 days now, so this is early on. And I thought, okay, I need to share these questions and I don't want to limit myself to how long this video is going to be. I don't want to stress myself out with that. I'm just going to share. I wrote some notes down, what came up, and what I am learning. And through this so called movement practice, because it's really not just a movement practice, it is a habit development tracking, and it's also self awareness, self understanding, it's spiritual growth, it's emotional growth, it's living, okay? It's becoming. That's what this practice is. So have a seat, maybe get a cup of tea. I do have my own tea, but it's all the way over there. We're not going to grab it right now. I'm just going to go ahead and go with this video. If I change my mind, I will pause the video and get my tea. Um, by the way, ginger tea has been a lifesaver during this practice. For the type of biospirituality that I have, or dosha is the Ayurvedic term. For the type that I have, ginger tea is absolutely excellent, and definitely research on your own. I want to go into that too deeply. So let's get started. Um, the things my walk have taught me so far. The first thing I also want to say before I continue is that video number 21, which is my milestone video, the first milestone video, shows you or talks about a little bit about um, what I'm learning. So I don't want to go too much into that and some of the resistance. But here's this, um, resistance for me has not been um, quote unquote laziness or lack of will. Okay. It's more balancing. Like, you've been doing this for this long, you know, balance it out. And that removes the judgment, because it's no longer why are you doing this instead of that. It's you need to give yourself this, and then that will follow. It's a much gentler, loving, calming, and it moves me faster to doing the thing once I acknowledge that. When our bodies ask to be heard, I think when we ignore it, over time, it can have one illnesses. We know that's the biggest one. It's some sort of illness, but also it shows up external to us in other ways. Like, it shows up in how we relate to other people. It shows up in the things we choose to do and not do because our bodies are not up to whatever the task is. We may find ourselves not taking on a project, not visiting people, not caring for those that care for us because our bodies need something else at the moment. So we need to listen and to our bodies. That's the first thing. The other thing is the reconditioning phase I mentioned very early on. and I gave myself 90 days to recondition. That's a long time. Typically, you hear 30 days, something like that. But I wanted to really be gentle because I'm also paying attention to and learning about what's going on behind the scene. So I don't want to rush the process of discovering something about myself that I was not aware about, or deepening the understanding of something about myself that I have either neglected, forgotten, or just need to dive deeper. So my reconditioning phase is somewhere between 30 and 90. It might be 45, it might be 90. Heck, it might be longer. I don't know. Priorities. I also quickly realized that, and by the way, I'm saying these, and I'm going to get to the questions. I need you guys to work with me on, and some questions I discovered through the process that I want us to talk about. Anyway, so priorities. My priorities changed, and they changed before this because I experienced some physical setbacks with my knee and some things. I was like, okay, I cannot make money working, other things, business, life, a priority over my health, well, life, a priority over my health. My health has to be the priority over everything. It really is wealth. It's not even like, because imagine this, you've got all the money that you want, you've got all the social uh, connections that you need, the relationships, the home, but yet you're ill. You can't enjoy it. So health to me after spirituality is the most important thing. Then of course relationships. I put that after, but immediately after that. But anyways, um, there has been quite a few visitors, and I call them visitors rather than calling them negative thoughts, because the moment we label them negative thoughts, then they're negatives. That means we have to have a reaction to them that is strong. We become defensive. I don't want to be defensive against my own thoughts. They're my thoughts. I have some control over them, you know, maybe not control over how frequently they visit or when they visit, but they're my thoughts. They belong to this thing, that we call the body, this temple. They're not, so they're visitors. They're visitors that either I've not acknowledged, and here are some of the ones that I identified during this 21 days. And I want you to, as I say them, maybe try to see if you can connect with any of them. The first one I talked about, which is resistance. That's a visitor. Resistance is a beautiful visitor. It's often dressed elaborately in other outfits, so it's like easily mistaken as something else. A perfect example of a resistance visitor for me was one time during this process, I felt the strong urge. I woke up with a strong urge and desire to finish writing my book in the middle of this, right? And I was like, that will take me hours. This is not I have most of the book, but it's going to take me hours to finish this book, not a day. And it was the strong urgency. I had to get to this book. I had to do it today. I had to at least look and see what I have. But I know myself well enough to know as soon as I opened that, I would have gone down the rabbit hole and I'd still be working on that book today, right now. There'd be no videos. It was perfect resistance. I said, thank you. I'm going to jot a little note. So I wrote myself a little note to check within myself about the book, because something needed my attention. What was that? I don't know. So I wrote myself a note and I put it in my note bin where I periodically go and check thoughts that come in to see if there's something that's still showing up. It never showed up again, by the way, because I know when I'm supposed to work on this book, and it's not right now. So um, there's other examples. Resistance could look at my pain. The pain in my knee came back, and I was like, "Oh dear God!" It went away, and now it's coming back. Is it okay? I wore the wrong shoes, and I'm like, I'm still gonna walk. In fact, I'm not only gonna walk. I'm going to go down those stairs and experience the pain. I made myself go down the stairs, experience the pain, and it came at the very end. I realized, oh, it had to do with two things: shoes and the way I was sleeping. That was causing this knee to act weird again. Modify those two things, the pain is gone. Okay. So, resistance, guilt. I'm gonna try not to spend too much time on everything, otherwise this will be a very long video. Guilt. Guilt about not doing, not talking to people, not calling, not doing this, not visiting other, you know, and the way guilt as a visitor show up for me, it's not always elaborate. In fact, it is one of the most painful visitors I experience because it usually is attached to something else that I consider important, like community, relationships, um, listening, sitting down and listening, to somebody else's concern and not say, I can't, I gotta go, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, and I gotta go for my walk. So guilt, urgency, kind of like similar to resistance, except something else needs to happen fast. Urgency as a visitor for me is very hard to manage because it knocks very loudly. It demands my attention and it goes against everything I believe in, which is pause, relax, deep breath. So urgency to me is always like, whoa, stop. What do you want? And more often than not, this thing that's urgent is not urgent. I'm not saying, if there was a fire or an emergency or somebody was ill or, you need to take care of something, yeah, take care of it, write yourself a note, but it's rarely life or death. Obviously, if it is, that's an urgency or crises, yes. But I find most urgent things are disguised as um, they're like it's like tripping on a stone or tripping on something as you walk in life. It's a way for you to uh, stop and go, well, was that serious or did I just trip on a tiny little pebble? Did I fall? It's we got to assess whether that urgency is real. That's what I'm trying to say. Money first is another one. And when you are operating um, in a self-reliant, self-sufficient way because of the type of constitution you have, like I do, it's all about earning and supplying for, and having resources for yourself and all of that stuff. The problem with that is, again, without health, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Without health, it doesn't matter. You may not be able to go to work. You may not be able to complete the task. You may not be able to do other things. So I find that the money first trap in visitor, when it shows up, it's in a form of, did you do what you needed to do to make sure you're going to get this or to complete this project or do whatever it is you need to do by the end of, especially when I was, if I'm working as a contractor for somebody, it's this is important, this is more important. No, it's not. It has a time and a date and a schedule, and I will follow that. And future self is another visitor, and my future self as a visitor is often very beautiful. And what I mean by that is she doesn't come in and be like, make a lot of demands. No, she just has promises. Promises that if I do this and this, I will have that. And I had to learn the hard way that a future self visitor, that's when you just start thinking about your future self with, and sometimes it's really subconscious. That's what I mean by visitor. The future self visitor is one that makes a promise of what you're going to get if you do certain things. And it can be in the form of daydreaming. When I was young, I used to do a lot of daydreaming. And if you're part of the constitution that I attract, the people that I serve, you probably like to just kind of, you know, and it's distracting. It can last. Those visitors can stay, whether it's future self 10 years, future self 3 years, future self 50 years. They can stay a while. They're not always positive, though. There is the future self that comes in, that will be, if you don't do this, this is what you're going to be like, you know. Are you going to, do you want to be an 80-year-old experiencing this? Do you want to, it can show up with some negativity too. In fact, I think if I sit a little longer with this just now as I'm talking with you, I would say 50-50. Sometimes it's a positive, like daydreaming, and then sometimes it's just plain old, why you're not doing this? You know, finish this book. You're not gonna have time when you're 70. Stuff like that. Like, how do you know? You're not my 70 self. You're my, you know, 62 self showing up. Anyway, and I'm not saying don't listen to when we have higher self shows up and gives us insight. That's different. So make sure you understand I'm not comparing future self with the highest form of present self that we have. That needs to be listened to. That's when we're centered, that's when we're conscious, that's when we're alert within ourselves, and then we're getting a specific message to do something very different than a future self visitor, which is often just a thought form. And thought forms have energy, and some of them are attached to our fears, some of them are attached to our um, desires, things we just wish could be, wanna have, etc. Perfection. Now, the word perfect means complete. That's what the etymology of the word is. It doesn't mean uh, trying to overdo or become this ideal. Actually, the way we use the word perfect, perfect is the same way it's really the word ideal. Ideal is a false, uh, reaching a false completion that is hard to reach, so to speak. Whereas perfect literally means complete. So why am I differentiating this? Because I use the word perfect a lot, and I don't mean perfectionism. I mean completion, and maybe I should switch to completion to avoid the confusion. Maybe not. So perfection shows up in the form of, as a visitor, in the form of you need to, well, let me speak for about me. I need to complete this. I mentioned the book as an example, um, or like the videos. I wanted, when I do things, it has to be this, it has to be that, it has to look a certain way. And I had to put that perfect to side, that perfectionism, excuse me, to side and embrace perfection differently, which means complete it. Complete it, check mark, and move on. Now, I'm not saying it will be put out something that I would be absolutely embarrassed or ashamed of, or that contradicts everything I believe in. Of course not. I'm speaking more of looking for ways to make it ideal when time, energy, and other factors say, no, you're done. You need to be done now. All right, distractions. That's big. That's another visitor that can show up in the form of the birds outside, in the form of phone call that takes an hour to talk, or a visit with someone that's supposed to be a quick stopover and ends up being longer, or hearing about somebody else. It could even be doom scrolling. It could be online watching a video and then, ooh, here's another one that's interesting. Here's another one that's interesting. And the task doesn't get done. Distraction as a visitor for me um, is pretty common. It's a common visitor. And what I've learned to do is identify which form of distraction and which is actually for real, like I need to give attention to this. 90% of distraction are just distractions. 10% maybe drop yourself a note for the future when you do your note reviews and check out to see if there's something that needs your attention. 90% of them are distractions. Dopamine drag. I spoke about this before, and that is when we give away too much of ourselves, and then um, we end up literally in the pit of negativity. And riding that pit is as important as creating the pit. Okay, that pit may be, it's as deep as you've given, or you've, when I say given, I don't mean to other people, it could be to yourself. This is important. But if you just ex, externalizing energy and not maintaining a reserve, that dopamine drag will happen. And there's other ways to describe it, but this is the one I can move on. All identities visiting. When all identities visit, it's because they need to be integrated. And now, when I did my very first letting go video for this series, I did not address that. It came later. This is what the beauty about doing this walk is, certain things are coming up that I either forgotten or they're revisiting, and I'm like, okay, this makes much more sense. So definitely watch that video, but then come back to this thought about um, all identities visiting. If they're not integrated, they're going to keep visiting. My movement going forward now is to take with me my old identities. I'm not leaving them behind. We're going to be arm in arm, and that's going to extend. Let's say to the left, it extend. That makes more sense. It'll extend to my younger selves, and then whatever identities I have in the future, and we're all going to be coming forward together, and that's a very different experience. Um, and then, of course, there's another visitor, which was fear. But fear has so many different cousins. So, this particular one was fear of starting. Okay. So, what can I say about fear of starting? What if, what if, what if you don't have this? You need this. Um, where do you have the time? How are you going to make the time? What happens when you start teaching again? Now you have more time, but you're not going to have more time then. It's constant, constant, constant. Um, you're not necessarily going to have these visitors show up because you are walking. These visitors are going to show up whether you're trying to write a book, whether you're trying to raise a family, whether you're trying to be a wonderful partner. They show up in life. And I think the walking journey is allowing me to see them through movement. But they're not strangers. They're going to show up in other ways. And maybe by allowing them to be part of my life and communicating with me and understanding how to give them a minute, 30 seconds of visit, 10 seconds, one, 1 second, and then say, see you later, allows me to respect myself more because they're me. They're not, these thoughts are part of me. They're not, well, we do have thoughts that are implanted. We know that. But that's a whole other conversation. But typically, the thoughts that we're having are ours. They could be sourced from external things like marketing stuff we've seen and all of that stuff. That's another video. The point is, they're still part of this mechanism, this intelligence. Okay. Uh, so 4 questions. Finally got to the 4 questions. And I think what I'm going to do is introduce the 4 questions and then I'm going to do a separate video so that this is already at 23 minutes. I don't really care so much about the length of this video. I just want to be able to upload it easier. And the shorter they are, the easier it is to upload. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this one out. And I invite you to go ahead and check out the 4 questions because this video had enough to stand alone, I think. But there's 4 questions that came up and I want to dive into. It's what am I avoiding? What story am I telling myself? What's the smallest next step? And which visitor is here today? And lastly, the biggest realization I had during the first 24 days of my of returning to movement. All right, so this is Irmina signing out. Thank you again for visiting. Thank you for staying a while, and see you at the next video. Until then.